right, we're back for part two of our discussion about Iran and what's going on in the world right now. If you missed our first episode on this, we just talked broadly and historically about U.S. Iran relations throughout the 20th century, especially the latter half of the 20th century, and also about congressional and executive tug of wars over war powers and where that authority ultimately lies. So please go back and check that out. It's kind of a more academic, historical overview of the subject, and I think this is maybe going to be a bit more conversational, hopefully. Um, but
Yeah, I wouldn't call it academic. That sounds bad.
Okay.
It's historical. It's historical. It gives you more grounding in the history of both Iran and also our Constitution as far as war powers go. That's how I'd pitch it.
Fair enough. Fair enough. Um, so I think we just wanted to take some time to have a conversation about what's actually happening in Iran right now, and maybe ask some of the basic, who, what, where, why, how, some of those at least. The first one I think we need to start with is the ostensible pretense of all this, which is that there's a fear that Iran has or will have or has stockpiles of nuclear weapons of some sort.
Yeah.
What do you think about that?
Well, yeah. I mean, so the supporters of Trump's attack on Iran, this particular one, right, that we're experiencing here in March of 2026, the rhetoric has been that it's an imminent threat, right? That both the Israelis and the Americans have assessed things and that this is an imminent threat. The Iranians have not negotiated, is another talking point. And, the one talking point I saw that came out of the White House is that they, within a week, they were a week away of nuclear capability. So they are a week away from striking Israel preemptively or something like that. So that has been the kind of the premise on which these airstrikes started a few days ago, and also the premise in which we do you call it an assassination? We took out the Ayatollah. We took out the leader of Iran with a missile strike or an airstrike, and so that's been the premise: is that this is an imminent threat that needs responded to immediately, and it involves nuclear threats, right?
Yeah, I mean, there's a great Daily Show clip from Jon Stewart from a few months ago where their team assembles this footage of Netanyahu saying just that, that Iran is like a week or two away from having a nuke. And the video footage of him saying that goes back to 1992 and then kind of just plays on repeat for the next 30 years. So I don't like that is what they're saying. I think most people who are relatively informed know that's complete BS.
Well, yeah, I mean, Rubio. I think it was Rubio that said it the other day that like Iran has been an imminent threat for 47 years or something like that. And it's like an imminent threat implies that this is recent, right? An imminent threat does not imply that this is a slow 47-year burn towards nuclear Armageddon. That's not what that word means, right? So the rhetoric is not matching up even within the same talking points, I think, whether it's Netanyahu or Trump or Rubio or Hegseth or whoever. So where is Iran on the nuclear development stage, right?
Well, I mean, there's a few things to say. I mean, one, just to pull back quickly, in the last episode we talked about how the U.S. has this coup in 1953 and ousts the prime minister and installs the monarch, the Shah, in power. Um, when does Iran originally get nuclear technology? If I had to give you one guess, what country supplied them with it? What could you? It's like
Was it us?
it sure was. Could you imagine that? So again, like Eisenhower in 53, he goes to the UN. He gives this very famous speech launching the Atoms for Peace initiative, which is this call to very altruistic call to get the country to pivot away from nuclear weaponization and towards civilian peaceful uses, energy, medical uses, and so forth. And this is going on across the whole world. But in '57, the U.S. does strike this kind of cooperative agreement to supply Iran with nuclear technology for peaceful purposes. And eventually the U.S. supplies them with, enriched uranium, with a reactor. So Iran's nuclear capabilities do go back to its relationship with the U.S. in the 50s.
Uh-huh. That's interesting.
Now, more recently, 2015, Obama inks the nuclear agreement. From what I understand, that basically it's like economic international sanctions are lifted. Iran gets a lot of that money back that had been withheld in return for allowing international regulatory bodies to come in and inspect their stockpiles, in addition to a reduction of like 98% of all of its low grade enriched uranium. So 10 years ago, and if you talk to someone in the Fox News wormhole, they're going to say, well, that was all, bonkers. And like Obama shouldn't have been trusting them. And
it was a bad deal, right? I've heard that phrase. Yeah.
And Trump rips up the deal in 2018 and reimposes sanctions. So where they're at now, I mean, I feel like something happened last year. I was told by our president that there were no more nukes. Am I correct?
Yes, because we bombed Iran last year too, right? June? Is that right?
June 25th, 20. I mean, this website is still active. This is not archived. Like, this is currently in March of 2026 on the White House's webpage, suggesting that Iran has no nuclear facilities. They've been obliterated, and suggestions otherwise are fake news.
Right. Even though, if you'll remember back to the time, right, there were even sources within the Pentagon that assessed things and were not so sure, right, that that we had knocked out all the nuclear facilities. We thought we might have knocked out. Those are deep bunkers that we dropped those bunker busters on, and it wasn't clear that the facilities hadn't been evacuated before we hit them. But yes, I do remember being accused of being unpatriotic for asking that kind of question, like how effective were the bombs? How total was the destruction? You weren't supposed to ask those kind of follow-up questions, according to Hegseth in June. And now here we are again with this imminent nuclear threat that we are, in theory, responding to in Iran. And again, that's not to it's not to subtract from the good efforts of U.S. military personnel trying to keep us safe. This is about how much do we trust what the people in charge are saying, right? If in June they told us, sleep soundly, right? We've knocked out the world's great nuclear threat. And now, less than a year later, we're being told they're a week away from nuclear, fallout. Something's not matching up. whether it's the intelligence or the people spewing it, there's clearly a disconnect.
Yeah, and I mean, without getting too much into like all the nitty gritty of the current events, from what I understand, the most recent developments do acknowledge that Iran had come to the table with the negotiations and were basically willing to, check every box that the U.S. was demanding. Um, and once it became clear that they were going to do that, well, okay, then the bombing starts. So, this is not a good faith effort on any front. And the fact that these despots in Iran are getting killed, um, that have been overseeing this repressive regime for close to 50 years now. Like, that's good. That's a good thing for the Iranian people.
Hopefully something good comes of it. Yeah.
Hopefully something good comes of it. But at the same time, Trump is not doing this for the Iranian people by any stretch. Um, at least I don't think most people think that. Um, so the question then becomes like, why now? I mean, there was this 12-day war last summer. You could ask, why did it stop then? But then why did it resume now in late February, early March of 2026? Do you have any thoughts?
Well, I think, Trump has said this himself, right? That a wartime president, in a way, has more power. But I think in his mind, he's leading up to the midterms, starting a war against one of the most long feared boogeymen in the world is maybe a way to boost his failing poll numbers. I mean, maybe that's part of the rationale. I think part of the rationale is also that Trump cares very much right now about his legacy. He's getting older. He's very keen on how he's going to be remembered. And, if he's casting himself as kind of the return of Reagan or the culmination of Reagan, it's the Iran hostage crisis that brings Reagan into power, right? Jimmy Carter's unable to deal with the hostage situation, unable to deal with the revolution in Iran. Reagan comes in as this tough talking president, and as soon as he takes office, the Iranians famously give up the hostages, right? And if you ask a pro-Reagan person, that's because they're so scared of dealing with a tough guy like Reagan. I think in some ways, Trump is trying to kind of like relive that or finish that fantasy of Americans calling the shots against the Iranians. And, knocking out the Ayatollah in the process is a way for him to say, look at me, bad guys fear. So I think internationally that's a thing. I think domestically that's part of it too. And then, there's Netanyahu, right? And the Israel side of this. The Israelis were kind of some of the main advocates for this most recent set of strikes. And I think that's also because Netanyahu sees the writing on the wall. They've wanted to take out Iran for a long time, and this is their, they will say this, their last best chance. And whether that means nuclear or because they've got a supporter in Trump in the White House, I don't know. But Israel is was clearly keen on getting this done and getting this done now for their own purposes.
I mean, I think the only group you can say is clearly benefiting currently is Israel. I mean, it's too early to tell if this is going to help the Iranian people in the future. I don't think many Americans think it's helping us at all. But Israel, like you said, has wanted this for a very long time. And
even within Israel, I think we should note that it's Netanyahu's government that is really pro this stance, right? I think people in the streets of Tel Aviv are not necessarily all, of a mind here. Like there are people, hunkering in place in Israel that probably wish this hadn't started. But
of course,
for Netanyahu and his government, definitely priority. Yeah.
Yeah, and I mean, Trump certainly is the first president in this term willing to fulfill that allied role with Israel in pursuing this. It's not the first time I think Netanyahu's tried. Um, you, you know, is I mean, the backdrop to all of this is the Epstein uh, files and their release in the last few months. In the immediate kind of day to day situation, you have the NPR article on I think February 24th, which drops and basically exposes the fact that this allegation from this woman filed in 2019 about her being raped by both Epstein and Trump in 1983. NPR breaks the news that that was removed and hidden from the file dump. Like 53 pages are missing. I mean, Trump's obviously all over the files, but that really, I think, is the most damning one at the time, which comes out and is all over the news. Um, is it a coincidence that 4 days, 5 days later, we're bombing Iran? I don't know. I don't personally think it's a coincidence.
Yeah,
And another element of the Epstein connection is the fact that he seems to have been in frequent communication with the Mossad. And
yeah,
what does Netanyahu have on Trump? I mean, we can say he's a supporter of Netanyahu and willing to do this with him, but also, like, is he just compromised? And Netanyahu is saying,
yeah.
now's the time to do this, or something else is going to leak. Um,
Right, right.
it still sounds
Or
conspiratorial to say that, but I'm not so sure it
yeah,
is.
yeah. I mean, either compromised or the other alternative, right? Which is maybe sounds less tinfoily, but no less sinister, right? Is to say that if Trump's mandate to rule, as he has described it, right, is starting to flail in the U.S. between Epstein, between the economy, between these, kind of runoff races that are not going Trump's way, down the ballot. Um, you know, is it? Are they running out of time? If you're Trump or Netanyahu in this relationship, are you running out of time in which you can pull a strike like this off? I don't think you have to be conspiratorial to think that the time the timeline is ticking, right, on your mandate, so to speak, right? So you better get what you think you want to get done, whether you're a Trump ally abroad or Trump himself here domestically. Because I think, the political winds have shifted in a way, especially after the ICE rollback in Minneapolis, and some of the other economic polls that have come out, in recent months, and with Epstein, there's just this glaring, slow leaking controversy that is becoming more and more sinister and harder to ignore. No matter what news outlet you tune into, I think, right? I mean, when it's NPR breaking a story one week, Washington Post, well, I don't think they've broken any story, but the Wall Street Journal has, right? Like, there are a lot of different news outlets that are digging into different aspects of this, um, and I think the American people can stick their head in the sand for so long, and I think Trump realizes that there's an expiration date to that.
Yeah, and I just think, I mean, it's a recent memory to recall George W. Bush's approval ratings in the immediate aftermath of 9/11 and how they surged. And, you know, I don't think there's many Americans that I know that support this at all. I mean, I've seen the percentage points around like 16% or something, like ridiculously low for like another potential forever war in the Middle East. Not that we're there yet, but this certainly could become that.
Yeah,
There does seem to be some sort of naive ploy to, start an international war as a way to rally the country around you. Um, Even though I don't think that's at all what's happening or what's going to happen in the next few months as this thing continues on. I think the biggest question, and again, we're so recently into this whole situation to really know with any clarity, but like, what comes next? How do you feel about the next few weeks, the next few months?
Yeah.
Are you optimistic at all? Are you cynical? Are you terrified? What do you think?
Well, I think it's going to be really interesting to see how um, Trump and company try to package this to their base, right? So it's one thing to say that Democrats are opposed to the war. They're going to be opposed to most things Trump tries to pull internationally or domestically, I think, at this point. Um, and independents are going to be, skeptical of, I think a lot of people are skeptical of, foreign interventionism as a policy. Kind of the era of the neocons is over, and Trump certainly hasn't billed himself as a neocon up until this point. I think the people it's going to be really interesting to see that they will have to eventually pitch this to, right, are his base, which, you know, even members of his cabinet fit into this kind of new America First isolationism, right? Like J.D. Vance is the one who called these things forever wars in the Middle East. He's just vice president now, right? So how do you square the rhetoric of just last year's campaign trail of, don't vote for Kamala because she's going to get us into another forever war in the Middle East. Don't vote for Kamala if you don't want to go to war with Iran. Those were literally things that were said, right? And now, less than a year, well, a little over a year later, you're going to have to sell a potential conflict in Iran, which is a tough nut to crack, right? This is a large, fairly unified, very ancient culture that, it's not a small country, right, to subdue. Even if the people there are chomping at the bit for change, which it seems like some of them are, you don't know that that's going to succeed, and you don't know that they necessarily want to throw in with the Americans and the Israelis right off the bat. So I think there's a lot of moving parts with how that conflict will play out, and it's not clear that he's got a lot of popular backing in the U.S. for this thing. And that I can't imagine that backing will grow unless they are able to somehow sell this war to the American people. The strikes in June, they sold by claiming ultimate success, right? Like they said, this is a one and done thing. It's a clean operation, no boots on the ground. So far, that seems to be kind of the way they're describing what's going on in the Middle East now. But it's unclear that that's actually going to be true. If Iran keeps lobbing missiles at American bases and American allies and economic assets in the Middle East, it's going to be a lot harder to pitch this as some kind of surgical strike against a leader or a surgical strike against a nuclear facility or something like that.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's exactly it. I have two thoughts to wrap it up. Like, one, just dovetailing on your point, they may have already bitten off more than they can chew. Um, there's no way to determine when Iran wants to stand down. Like, they might decide, hey, we're going to close the Strait of Hormuz today on March 5th and keep it closed indefinitely. Talking about appealing to your MAGA base, like that's 30% of the world's oil right there. I think there's already increases in gas prices in the US, and that's nothing yet compared to what it could be in the next few weeks or months. So there is already, I think, some sense that there might be some back channel negotiations happening to end this, but that's not entirely up to Trump or the US or the US's allies at this point. I mean, Iran also has to agree to that. And it seems like they've been preparing for this for quite some time. And why wouldn't you be? especially after this past June. Um, so that is one element of it, and the other is the question of like Iranian support. There's an interesting anecdote about World War II where, for much of World War II, about 30% of the German population resisted the Nazis internally. Refused to let their kids enroll in the Hitler Youth. Paid less into the system than they needed to. At a certain point, when your community is getting bombed and bombed again, and you're losing relatives and you're losing family members from these bombs, it becomes more a matter of self-preservation, and you just got to flip and try and stay alive. And so, from the Iranian civilians' perspective, yeah, there's no love for the Ayatollah, who's now gone, and the current regime. But there's also no love for Americans bombing their cities.
Yeah.
And there hasn't been love for Americans for quite some time.
Yeah.
So it's a very weird situation, a very delicate situation where the more aggressive the U.S. and Israel are, the risk they run of actually entrenching the current regime and solidifying support around it, not because of some ideological reason, but just from a preservation standpoint and wanting to stay alive.
Yeah, yeah. Well, and I think the more the U.S. works in concert with Israel in this conflict, the harder it will be diplomatically to distinguish, right? Because the Iranians' relationship with Israel is even more fraught than their relationship with the Americans, right? If it seems, as it seems right now, that the Americans and the Israelis are working in tandem, and there's no daylight between Israeli goals in the Middle East and Trump goals in the Middle East, or towards Iran specifically, that's going to be very hard to win over any kind of Iranian groundswell of support, because I think there are plenty of Iranian Muslims who might not like their current regime, but might also be very hesitant to throw into any kind of alliance with the Israelis, right? As a sort of an existential threat. And that's just the reality. So the U.S. getting pulled in to this conflict by an ally, or coordinating with that ally against Iran, in a way complicates things even more, I think. And not coordinating or communicating with our other allies, right? The Europeans, the Brits, India-ish ally, right? Like other world partners are not privy to everything that's going on, and certainly we're not privy to the lead up of this. That's always risky business, right? We've already rocked the boat with our old allies plenty over the last year. At what point does it become the breaking point where they just view us as an untrustworthy partner?
I think we're there. For like NATO
might be
allies?
in the rear. Yeah, it might be in the rear view mirror.
Yeah, in what way is the U.S. really all that different from Russia and being viewed, at least, as a rogue state, unwilling to abide by, the rules of war? I mean, certainly the U.S. hasn't invaded Ukraine or anything to that extent, but extra legal killings in the Caribbean, going into Venezuela and kidnapping and removing their head of state,
saber rattling in Greenland with a NATO ally, right?
Yeah. I don't think there's any trust there, and even if best case scenario we get someone in the White House 3 years from now who's competent and willing to try and repair those relationships, that trust is going to take a long time to rebuild, because the way our system works, every 4 years we could have another Trump, which is depressing.
Democracy cuts both ways. We'll see.
Yeah, we'll see. But anyways, I think we'll wrap it up there. And thank you for watching, everyone. And Stay tuned.